Hello and welcome to Lunchtime Politics. I am Kayode Okikiolu. On the news this hour, President Muhammadu Buhari says his administration is working with state governments in the northwest of the country to revamp security structures and operations following infiltration of bandits. The PDP candidate in the Osun governorship election, Senator Ademola Adeleke, has asked the Supreme Court to uphold his appeal and set aside the judgment of the appeal court while restoring the judgment of the tribunal which declared him winner of the September 2018 governorship election in Osun State. And politicians continue to disagree after the European Union election group submitted its election observation report on the 2019 elections. Well, let's kick off this noon bulletin with a decision by President Muhammadu Buhari to streamline and focus on fighting banditry in the northwest region of the country. The presidency, in a statement, says President Muhammadu Buhari's administration is working with state governments in northwest of the country to revamp security structures and operations following infiltration by bandits. The statement went further to state that there will be a repositioning of security apparatus, and this comes at the heels of killings and destruction of property in some states, which includes the recent attacks in Zamfara state that left 34 people dead in Tungar Kafao and Gidan Wawash in Kafi local government area of the state. The statement also states that, and I quote, while extending condolences to government and the people of Sokoto and Zamfara states for losses in recent attacks, the president has directed immediate implementation of the long-term strategic security plan for the geopolitical zone, which was collectively drawn by security agencies and the state governments, end of quote. Now, under the security plan, states working with federal governments are expected to support security and military operations with logistics and local intelligence. They are also required to strengthen the loop and scale up surveillance, and federal government is establishing new forward operational bases. Now, the presidency further states that as part of the plan, the National Emergency Management Agency and the State Emergency Management Agencies are expected to streamline operations to provide succor for displaced persons, many of whom are taking refuge in neighboring Niger Republic, and ensure their return under protection. Well, the Supreme Court has adjourned till July the 5th to deliver in the appeals filed by the People's Democratic Party and its governorship candidates in the election, Senator Ademola Adeleke, and that's on the Osun State governorship election. At the hearing of the case in the Apex Court today, the PDP and Adeleke asked the court to uphold their appeal and set aside the judgment of the appeal court and restore the judgment of the election tribunal, which declared him winner of the poll. But responding to the application, the counsel to Governor Gboyega Oyetola and the APC asked the Supreme Court to dismiss the application by Adeleke and affirm Governor Oyetola's victory, while the counsel to INEC said he would abide by the court's judgment. The Abuja division of the Court of Appeal had on May the 9th, 2019, delivered judgment in the case and then affirmed Oyetola's victory. Following that verdict, the PDP and Adeleke approached the Supreme Court against the majority decision of the Court of Appeal. We'll bring you more updates on that one. But let's head over to Taraba State, where Governor Darius Ishaku has asked the judiciary in the country to always ensure speedy dispensation of justice. The governor was speaking at a valedictory session in honor of the retired Chief Judge of Taraba State, Justice Josephine Tukur. On her part, the outgoing Chief Judge expressed her confidence in the state's judges and encouraged them to protect the sanctity of the judiciary. The valedictory session also attracted the former Chief Justice of Nigeria, Justice Mahmoud Mohammed, among other judges and senior lawyers from across the country.
I want to plead on behalf of the judiciary that adequate steps be taken by the relevant government agencies to resolve all administrative bottlenecks so as to realize the full implementation. Suffice it to quote from late Usman Danfodio, peace upon him, that, I quote, A country can survive without religion, but no country can survive without justice, unquote. Therefore, the need to make the working of the judiciary smooth cannot be overemphasized, as the judiciary is not only the last hope of the common man, but without it, government and society cannot function.
And the European Union Election Monitoring Group has presented its election observations of the 2019 election to the Inter-Party Advisory Council, that's IPAC. Well, IPAC is the umbrella body for all political parties in Nigeria, and it is chaired by the national chairman of PPA, Mr. Peter Ame. The head of the delegation, Ms. Sarah Fradley, says reforms are necessary to strengthen Nigeria's electoral process, which is their major concern, and not the actual outcomes of the elections. IPAC chairman, Mr. Peter Ame, on his part, says they will look into the report and will push for the implementation of these recommendations. They are also urging the National Assembly to work urgently on the Electoral Act for passage before the elections in Kogi and Bayelsa State in November this year. Well, let's get more on their meeting and the outcome. Our correspondent, Kayla Maguire, is live for us. Hello, Kayla.
Hi, Kayode. Okay, so we're at IPAC office, and basically what's happened today is that the EU...
Well, we apologize for that poor audio, but we'll get Kayla much later. Now, there have been series of, issues raised from political parties and non-politicians about the European Union Elections Monitoring Group report on the 2019 elections. Well, the leading parties in the election were fingered in the report on the issue of violence, which saw over 150 people killed. The PDP and the APC had their say on their roles and the way forward on our political program, Sunday Politics.
The report that has just been released has vindicated the position of the PDP. They observed that the process of coalition was not transparent. What other name do you call that? That is rigging. It has no other name other than rigging. That the coalition was not transparent. Then they propose solution, recommendation as to how it can be improved upon. And INEC in their own turn have now said that, okay, they will implement it against future elections, admitting that it was not transparent enough. The cream of their observation was that the coalition, call it at the state level, at the federal level, was not transparent enough. That the coalition was not transparent. That is pure and applied rigging. It has no other definition other than that.
The report says that the transmission of the results were not transparent. They said it was a collation process. And then the EU did not go ahead to explain what they meant by the collation process. Because if you understand what is in the Electoral Act, it says clearly that results will be collected from the ward to the local government to the, and on and on, to the unit, from the unit to the ward, to the local government, to the state, and then, of course, the National Collation Center, where I was at that time. Now, the EU still confirmed in their report that they discovered that for each polling unit, the counting process was very transparent. And after counting of the votes in each of the units, you remember that this from ECATA, they were pasted clearly on the signboard or the wall for everybody to see. And everybody took snapshots of this from ECATAs across the country. So there was no manipulation of that process. That was where the process actually started.
Now let's get some perspectives on the European Union Monitoring Group observations and their recommendations. And we have joining us from our Abuja studio, Mr. Jude Ilo. He's a rights activist and lawyer, and he's a country officer and head of Nigeria office of the Open Society Initiative for West Africa. We'd like to appreciate your time on the program this afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Now, I know there's been extensive analysis on these recommendations, and I'd like to point out something that is a bit worrisome to most Nigerians. Now, if you go to the first page, which I'm sure you're conversant with, of that particular document, you will see something, and that is a line that says, many similar recommendations were also made in 2015 and by previous EU EOMs. However, they have been adapted and prioritized. And this, to me, sounds like saying, we told you these things. We advised you to sort these issues in 2015. But yet again, you have these problems. So why do you think we're in this perpetual vicious cycle when it comes to elections in Nigeria?
I'll answer that with a question. You know, who benefits when the systems don't work? It's the politicians. And so there is no incentive for them to do the right thing. Members of National Assembly owe their allegiance to their political parties and to themselves, most unfortunately. So they are much more interested in maintaining the status quo and making it impossible for any useful change that will remove the control of the system from them that are politicians to the average Nigerian citizens. And I watched the reaction of the two political parties to the report, and it's just unfortunate. Because when you look at this report, there are certain buzzwords that were in this report that should worry all of us. The report recognized the absence of integrity. It recognized the absence of transparency. It recognized the abuse of power of incumbency, both at the federal and the state level. And finally, it talks about violence. I would assume that our politicians, that the ruling party, would at least take a pause and understand that between November last year and March, when we concluded the elections, we lost more than 600 Nigerians to election-related violence. That we've conducted a ballot, a voting process, that has left this country more divided than we can ever remember. That we're looking at an INEC, an agency of government, that was on a perpetual siege throughout the election. We saw our security agents take away the cloak of impartiality and became active participants in the field of election. This is not about politics. It's not about winning or losing. It's about having the conscience and the courage to accept that we got it wrong in 2019. Right. This report did not exonerate Nigeria. If anything, it's a damning report from the EU. Because you can look at the report of the EU in 2011, in 2015, and now in 2019. Look at the language. Look at the progression and how hard their language is. That this election could be better. Right. And our politicians should stop this game of pointing fingers, of making unnecessary sound bites, and focus on the fact that we have a process that does not promote or reinforce integrity. Okay. And now, civil society groups have come out to say that this election also lacked credibility.
Mr. Ilo, I'd like to quickly focus on something else, and that's solutions. I mean, you've talked about the INEC, you've talked about politicians. At some point, you even mentioned us, and I want to believe you're talking about Nigerians. So moving forward, who are the people you expect to come together and say, okay, let's solve this once and for all? You've mentioned INEC, you've mentioned political parties. Who else needs to come on board so we can have, better elections?
The truth of the matter is that I've not read anywhere where freedom is freely given. Because as far as I'm concerned, the manipulation of electoral process is a subjugation of individual freedom of Nigerians. So the people who are supposed to be in the forefront of electoral reform are Nigerians. We are not doing enough. Less than 40% of us came out to vote during the election. And for good reasons. There was violence, there was voter suppression, there were a lot of reasons why we shouldn't vote. But if we were denied opportunity to hear our voices in the ballot, what have we done about it afterwards? Right. So I think the starting point is that we should find an opportunity to amplify the voices of the Nigerian citizens. They should make the demand about the kind of election they want. Okay. Secondly, we should make sure that people who undermine the electoral process get punished for it. As long as politicians can bulldoze their way into acquiring the certificate of return and walk away without any consequence. Like we're seeing in Imo State, where an INEC official said he was announcing results under duress, and the same candidate is now sitting in the Senate. As long as things like this happen, the politicians will have no incentive to do the right thing. So there has to be accountability. The third point is that INEC needs to raise their game. Okay. I do not see any reason why we cannot have our electoral results with proper disaggregation of which each polling station scored, so that you and I, who are the voters, can look at it with the results we may have copied from our polling station and say, this is correct. All right. So there must be some element of introspection and reform within INEC to, one, ensure transparency of collation process, fidelity to the electoral guidelines, and above all, make sure that there is no perception of partiality.
Now, Mr. Ilo, I'd like you to hold on for a bit. Mr. Ilo, I'd like you to hold on for a bit. We'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll delve on some of these issues more. I see you have a lot to say, so let's hold you up for a bit. And when we return, still ahead, how did a gorilla swallow 6.8 billion naira in Kano State? That's a major question, perhaps a billion naira question. We'll talk about that when we return. Stay with us. Welcome back to Lunchtime Politics. And now to some of our stories in brief. The incessant increase of social vices amongst young people today is clear, and a clear reflection of the failure of fathers. And this is according to the Vice President, or rather the Governor of Delta State, Ifeanyi Okowa, who was speaking at the St. Peter's Anglican Church in Bojiowa, Ika Northeast, and that's in the state, where this year's Father's Day was celebrated. The governor asked fathers to wake up to their responsibilities of exhibiting good leadership skills that will help mold a society of hardworking and dedicated youths that are capable of taking over the affairs of the nation in the nearest future. And the Anambra State Governor, Mr. Willie Obiano, has inspected the internal road project undertaken by the state government at Amici Diocesan Hospital, which he says is part of the measures towards improving healthcare delivery in the area. The governor, who was also conducted around some facilities undertaken by the hospital by the Bishop of Amici Anglican Diocese, Right Reverend Ephraim Ikako, expresses joy over the massive development in the hospital, and he urges the hospital management to be part of the state health insurance scheme for affordable and accessible health care. Well, let's rejoin our guest in our Abuja studio as we talk about the EU's report and recommendations on the 2019 elections. Mr. Jude Ilo is a rights activist. We'd like to appreciate your time. Thank you for staying with us. Now, I'd like to ask you also, you were talking about, you know what, let me just allow you to land on your previous idea before we move on.
So, thank you very much. So my point is, you know, there are a couple of things we need to do as a people. There are a couple of things we need to ensure are in place. And I talked about the issue of accountability, ensuring that people who, you know, mess up the system are adequately punished for it. And the need for INEC to embark on some level of reform to promote accountability and transparency in their action. Part of the things we saw in this election that was worrying, you know, was the security agencies, especially the military, the role they played in some parts of the country, and the fact that they went beyond their remit. And in some instances, actually, we had stories of the military and the police almost at, you know, guns drawn and all of that. And so it is important that we're very clear on what we want the security agencies to do in election, how we oversight that assignment, and how we ensure that people who, again, go beyond what they're supposed to do or are adequately punished. We cannot continue to run elections this way. Elections should be progressive. You know, 2011 was good, 2015 was better, 2019 should have been much, much better. But what we are seeing now is reports from both local and international observers that there were fundamental challenges with the election. And this is something as a country we need to sit back and think about. Because you and I know that elections are often the only time as citizens we have opportunity to make our voices heard. And if we continue to stifle that voice and deny the full expression of Nigerians through the ballot, then we're actually inviting anarchy in our country. Right.
Now, Mr. Ilo, I'd like us to part on this note. If you go back to that report, the first page again, you'll see the opening statement that talks about, you know, some of the issues, saying that, you know what, if we don't sort this in Nigeria, we might not have accountable leadership. I mean, trying to draw the similarity or the stretch between elections and governance. Now, moving forward, we have elections in a few months. We have elections in the next 4 years. Do you think this is achievable?
Of course, I think it's achievable. Like I said earlier, if Nigerians demand it, it's achievable. Like I said, the problem is that there are no consequences for bad behavior in this country. That's the problem. So people get into elective posts through questionable means and, you know, they get to enjoy it. We don't make any demand as a people. During elections, they give us a bit of handout and we are, you know, kumbaya, everybody's happy. So we need to make some demand, hard demands this time. And
Okay.
I think the international community should also help us. In instances where our voices are not properly heard, they should help us amplify our voices.
Right.
They shouldn't let people who undermine our electoral processes to be traveling to their countries.
Okay, now,
to
Mr.
keep monies
Jude,
in their countries,
Mr.
to keep
Ilo,
their children in their countries.
I'd like to butt in here. Yet again, I think the takeaway from our discussion is you and I, Nigerians, need to actually pay more attention to the electoral process and ensure that we keep our leaders and the institutions accountable. I'd like to appreciate Mr. Judilo, a rights activist and a lawyer. He's also the country officer and head of Nigeria office of the Open Society Initiative for West Africa. We appreciate your time on the program. Well, let's move on to some other stories. As we speak, the Independent National Electoral Commission has taken steps to critically examine the electoral process and the umpires' activities during the 2019 election with a view to make it better. Now, during a review mechanism session held in Umuahia, the Abia State capital, the Commission, with all the electoral officers involved in the elections, brought to the fore critical issues which affected the polls. According to the Resident Electoral Commissioner in Abia State, Mr. Joseph Ilo, it says the challenge of the exercise is not issue of funding or electoral guidelines, but says security is apt for democracy to be sustained. The INEC National Commissioner, Professor Okechukwu Ebanu, said the outcome of the gathering will enable the umpire to bridge the gap as well as issues encountered. And it appears it is no longer business as usual in the city of Lagos, that's Nigeria's commercial hub, as there might soon be a stringent action against traffic offenders. The Lagos State Governor, Mr. Babajide Sanwo-Olu, says he is working with the acting chief judge of the state to set up special mobile courts that will dispense judgment on traffic offenses. Mr. Sanwo-Olu says any offender caught will be made to serve the punishment immediately, which will be in form of compulsory community service, as his administration has declared zero tolerance for disobedience to traffic rules. The Lagos State Governor, Babajide Sanwo-Olu, says he needs the support of Lagos residents to achieve his aim of making Lagos a home for all. He was speaking at an interdenominational service organized by the Christian Association of Nigeria at the headquarters of the Deeper Life Bible Church here in Lagos.
Today is the 16th of June, meaning that I've spent 19 days out of the 1,460 days. I have remaining 1,441 days, and it is counting. It is going by the day. You have a role to play. You have a part to play in it. We have declared zero tolerance on potholes, and by the grace of God, we will be doing it. We have started. We are going to publish a number in the next couple of days in which you'll be sending your pictures. Not that we know that the roads are bad, but the ones that we can fix in terms of potholes, they will be working 24/7.
And now to some very interesting story. Governor Abdullahi Ganduje of Kano State has ordered the State Anti-Corruption Commission to probe the alleged swallowing of the sum of 6.8 million naira. By the way, it's 6.8 million naira and not 6.8 billion naira, as earlier reported. And this is allegedly by a gorilla in the Kano Zoological Gardens. The governor, in a statement by his chief press secretary, Abba Anwar, wants the investigation to commence immediately. The governor expresses concern over the allegation and wants the commission to do an aggressive investigation towards unearthing every detail surrounding the incident. In the meantime, the executive chairman of the commission, Muhuyi Magaji, told our correspondent that his commission is already investigating the matter, just as he added that there are evidences before it. He's promising that the commission will catch the gorilla that swallowed the money and bring it back for prosecution. And on that somewhat puzzling note, we end our show for this afternoon. Thank you for watching. I am Kayode Okikiolu.